Okay, so now that I just did that last video where I tried one of your guys' openers, I'm gonna go and try to do the Frosty or the Crystal Overexplained. The last two that I have left, so might as well try and knock them out whilst we can. So we're gonna change all our perks back over now to being the value-oriented perks that don't really point us in any specific direction, and kinda just give us a foot in the door in terms of just like value along the run somewhere. Hopefully we can get Frost, because Frost is pretty strong and is quite consistent at just like blowing up the late game. So we're gonna do our usual. We got treasure here, which is fine. Like reaching level 5 you get a free epic, and then you could sell it or use it, etc. It's fine. It's just money on the way. Don't do this. I know I made the video where I speed level to 5. That was more to showcase like what it can do, not so much like that you should do it. Don't just skip your day 1 and day 2s. They're important for your scaling. But yeah, we'll level. Oh, we got the triple moon knife action here. We also have arcane and flame disabled. So I'm actually gonna freeze for the triple moon knife because this is a good way for day 4 for us to get our epic chest on day 4. So for Crystal and Frosty, you're mainly looking for your engine piece, really, which, when I say engine piece, I mean things like your ambers, your frost orbs, your flame orbs, your arcane orbs, etc. For Frosty, if you can manage to get a frost orb with a couple of the key big nuke items, you're pretty set. But there are ways to also utilize other build paths that you could do for Frosty, which I will try and cover as we see them. So we can do this, and then we can level, and then on day 4 we can pair off the moon knife and get us a epic chest. This is kind of scary. Like, this shouldn't beat us today, but this can be scary. The blessing is interesting. Honestly, if he healing touched, we probably would have lost this, but it's fine. Let's take weapon loot. Cool, we got a free moon knife so we can pair off. Got our epic chest. We got a glacier. Glacier isn't the best frost item. It can go crazy, but you need other frost items to make it go crazy. So instead of picking up this moon knife now, I'm actually going to roll a little bit and see what we can find. Okay, we got 2 ice spears. Snowflakes would be good if we had like a cold shot in the shop, but we don't. That's okay. I was kind of hoping that we would find a Conjure Spear book, because Conjure Spear plus Ice Spear goes kind of crazy. And by kind of, I mean it goes very crazy. So Frosty is one of those builds where they love crit. Like, everything they do is crit related in some shape or form. We're just going to sell out of these so they can stop showing up. Let's pair off our Frostbook. We can Dreamcatcher onto the Frost Spear. And we're going to still roll a tiny bit here, because it's... There we go, we got a cold shot, now we're going to level. Everything with Frost is basically crit related. Like, every Frost item comes with some form of crit, apart from Frost Orb and Sapphire Amulet, which is fine, but like, they help you in other ways. And then your big payoff items want your other items to crit. So, buy this, get our free epic. Got our Conjure Spear. Excellent. So now, what we're going to do is sell the Moon Knife. We're going to keep these, because they're going to help us. So why was I looking for a Conjure Spear? This is specifically only something that I'm going to really force when I'm playing Frost, and we see early Ice Spears. So Conjure Spear allows us to print, we call it printing, but basically anything that makes a copy of an item, we call that printing, because you're just making extra copies. It's only ever going to be the plain copy, so it will be like the base version of this. So for example, we'll just use this Cold Shot for example. If we had an item that would make a plain copy of Cold Shot, it would look like this Cold Shot. It will become base stats, etc. If we buffed this Cold Shot up, and then copied it, it's still only going to look like the base statted version of a cold shot. It's not going to come with like healing and stuff attached. So in that sense, the reason why we want to Conjure Spear is so we can create copies of our Ice Spear, which will come as like the base version of this Ice Spear, and it will allow us to pair it off to get it to 2-star. But we're not just looking for 1 2-star Ice Spear, we're actually going to be trying to get 3 2-star Ice Spears. And that will come apparent in the future, because if you read, this 1-star version gives you 4% crit chance every time it triggers. That's not that great. It gets to 100%, you're just doubling your damage. And then that extra crit chance does nothing, unless you get a Warhorn. But when you get it to 2-star, it starts also gaining damage on every single trigger. And since now we can create copies and have lots of Ice Spears, if we can get free 2-star Ice Spears, we can have free spears doing this that attack generally pretty quick. That's why we're dream capturing it, so it's even faster. And we can go on that way. We can get rid of these so we can level up as well to make up that level that we missed. We're probably going to throw around here to make this work, which is fine because we're just looking for our copies. And then from this position, what we're looking for is either a Nature's Call to put up here, or a Lost Fragment to put down here, a Frozen Orb to put here, and a Sapphire Amulet, which will increase our critical damage. And when that all comes together, you'll see how that's going to look. So here we have 2 more spears, we have a Nature's Call, we're going to stick that up here. We're going to put these in so they can start generating their crit rate. We'll put it like this though, since this is the better spear. And we'll go. And as you can see, when it printed these, they came as their base version. There's no extra crit that this has scaled, etc. attached to the item. It is just the plain copy. But you can see, like, we're also just winning rounds. Like, Ice Spear does really good damage for the value that it has. We could do this now. Start printing some more copies. And we can keep going like this until we basically lose. And we're just going to level up. And we'll keep going. And you can see we're just winning. Like, Ice Spear is incredibly strong. Now we have Frosty Gift. This will give us a Frost Orb, which is an item we want, but we don't have the Lost Fragment yet. Hopefully if we can get one from this. We did not get a Lost Fragment. That's unfortunate. If we got a Lost Fragment instead of Nature's Call, we could turn the Lost Fragment into being Frosty, and then this way the Lost Fragment will trigger every single time the Frost Orb will trigger, which will then give the Frost Orb more multicast, and they will just end up looping on each other, going infinite, and causing the spears to also go. Since we can't do that, instead we're going to turn this Dream Catcher into a Frosty, so now every time this activates, it's going to activate the Dream Catcher. So this now means we could do this and speed up the cooldown reduction of the Frost Orb. We have Winter's Embrace over here. Winter's Embrace is also an incredibly powerful frost item. It's not going to be on the board for this type of frost build that we're currently doing, but this is also very good when you pair it with stuff like Cold Shot, the bow that we had earlier, and you could pair it with Frostbound, which is the other legendary frost book, which gains damage every single time you crit. So those 3 being together with a Frost Orb also create a super powerful late game build. But we're going to be now looking for Ice Spears, and we're going to look for some Sapphire Amulets to go with our Frost Orb. There's another Frost Orb. There's another Frost Orb. So now we have our 1-star Frost Orb. And we did not find... There's the other book I was mentioning. Whenever an item crits, permanently gain +2 damage. That is completely fine with what we're doing. Like, it would actually fit quite nicely up here, but instead we're going to look for more spears. We've got another spear here. So what you're going to find now is, like, every time this Frost Orb triggers, it's going to cause a big burst of damage from our Ice Spears. And we want to get some more 2-star Ice Spears, so that way we can drop the book. There's our Sapphire Amulet. This is going to replace the Dreamcatcher soon. Let's do this. This will help speed up our Frost Orb. 3.6 seconds already. It's another Frost Orb. And you can see every single time this Frost Orb triggers, we get a massive burst of damage. And that's without the Sapphire Amulet. We only got 1 spear because we're killing too quick. Okay, sell out this. It's the last round, so we're just going to pivot into our endgame board, which is basically this. Basically, we would have this here, and this would be another 2-star spear, but because we won too fast, we don't get to the point of having another 2-star spear, so we're just going to use this extra orb to trigger some more damage from this. There's a chance we lose this round, so I'm going to freeze for the extra orb, and we'll go from here. But it's very unlikely that we lose, because it just does so much damage. So yeah, that was a pretty quick run as Frost. Let's head over to the collection, and I'm going to comment on some things. So this version that we just ran was running all around the Ice Spear. As you star up this Ice Spear, at its base form, it's just gaining 2% crit on every single trigger. It's pretty good DPS. It's 2.4 for 20 damage, which is then eventually going to be guaranteed to crit, so it'll be 2.4 for 40 damage. It's about the same speed as a Refined Spear that does 15 damage, so this is just basically a better Refined Spear in its base form. When you go to 1-star, It's generally quite cheap as well, and when you go to 1 star, it's gaining 4% crit, and it's doing 40 damage, so it becomes 2.4 for 80. And then you go to 2 star, and it starts gaining that bonus damage on every single trigger as well, which is why this build works. If you get it to 3 star at any point, it's just doubling those values, so you're gaining 8 and 16. The extra crit doesn't matter unless you have something like a Warhorn in the build, which Warhorn basically makes an item gain bonus damage equal to their crit, and then as you start starring it up, it like doubles their crit, and then triple their 4 times their crit, and then eventually 6 times their crit. So making something like a Warhorn Frosty from that same Lyra event is very good when you're using something like, say, the Ice Spear or the Glacier. But another thing that's really good about this build is it's so simple to get going, because it's just one item. You literally conjure your spear to print yourselves copies of the spear. If you can't find copies of the spear, that's fine. You can still just naturally buy them, and there's other build paths that you can go with, which I will comment on in a second. But yeah, finding an early conjure spear unlocks the potential of doing what I just did there, so that's something that you should always look out. If you get a day 3 conjure spear, for example, for pairing off your 15 costs, or a day 4 conjure spear for pairing off your 15 costs, and you see an ice spear relatively soon after that, you can easily force what I just did, as you just clearly saw me force it. Because when you're removing the RNG factor of having to find spears in the shop and you're just getting them from the book, it's a very consistent way of just getting damage. Outside of this, if we talk about each item individually now, we got Snowflakes. This item is completely fine. It's rather quick. It's the same speed as the Ice Spear. It does less damage. It comes with 25% crit base, and it has 1 bleed. The bleed is quite nice because the fact this is going to be shooting quite quick. The projectile is quite slow, but it is going to be applying that bleed, ramping up its damage over time. But since it's a fast weapon, it also pairs very nicely with Cold Shot. So every time this triggers, it will trigger the Cold Shot. This will then build its damage, which is only 5, which is not much, but it will be re-triggering that bleed damage. So these two pair together quite nicely as an early game opener for tempoing yourself throughout the game. As you start up the Snowflakes, it gains more crit, so it becomes 50%. Again, everything in Frost is about wanting to crit. So as you get this leveled up, its crit gets higher and higher, and it starts applying more and more bleed. But as you get it to 2 star, the unique thing about Snowflakes and why it's pretty consistent as an early game item is because once it's 2 star, it also permanently reduces its cooldown by 0.2 seconds. This is similar to an item like, say, for Moon, how Moon has High Blade that reduces its cooldown. Snowflakes does something similar. The only downside to Snowflakes is once it's 2 star and you have its cooldown reduced all the way down to 1 second, making it 3 star only makes it apply the bleed twice. It doesn't actually gain any more damage value, even though like the number does skyrocket, like from its base form of being 8 all the way up to 32 at 2 star and then 64 at 3 star. It's not a very good candidate to be a 3 star if you are playing the Frost package. There is just better options for your Crown Forge Bruce and your Day 9 events. But getting it to 2 star pretty early is pretty common to do because it is a common item. It only costs 25 and it synergizes quite well with some of these other things. Like this item could just stay on your board all the way through the run, as it's a good source of bleed for anything that can multi-hit that loves bleed, which is your cold shots, your frostbounds, and like even if you have frozen orb, the Snowflakes itself could also be a good bleed candidate. When we look at Icy Axe, it's just a big bonk. So Icy Axe has 50% crit and does 25 damage at very slow 3.8 seconds. Day 1, double Icy Axe can just absolutely annihilate people's health bars. Like this thing will just chunk people like no tomorrow. If it crits, you win, basically. If you've ever played WoW, it's very simply like an Arms Warrior where it's like, if I crit, I win. That's the same thing with Icy Axe. As you star it up, it becomes 100% crit, so it's guaranteed to do the 100 damage now every single swing. So day 2, you can easily get this paired, and it's going to do 100 damage per swing at 3.8 second cooldown. It's quite chunky. Then when you get it to 2 star, it starts triggering an extra time for the first time it triggers. So if you manage to get this multicasted before it can trigger, because this is a 3.8 second cooldown, so you could quite easily give it something like a Nature's Call, you can actually have this thing chunk people's health down really fast. And I wouldn't really use an Icy Axe in a Frost-related build, but since it is a Frost item and stuff like that, you can Frost Orbit. But in an Axe build, Icy Axe is pretty potent if you can get it going early, and you can just give it a Sapphire Amulet as well. Since it's guaranteed to crit, it's going to just absolutely donk people. So for an Icy Axe-related build, I would actually go with the good old traditional things of like Chopper to give your axes permanent damage, and wood chopping to give your axes permanent damage. And then you can pair all that with, say, giving the wood chopping some cooldown reduction, so that way it can buff up your axe faster. Multicast the book as well, so that way you can scale up that damage faster, and multicast the ice axe itself, so that it does all that big bonking faster with your nature's cool and your lost fragments. And then pair that with a nice night quill and your choppers, and you can quite easily just burst people in the first trigger of this in the first trigger of your 2-star Icy Axe and just have it absolutely annihilate people's health bar in the early game. If you ever get it to 3-star, it does trigger 2 times on the first trigger. So this really can just 100-0 people on its first trigger quite commonly, and it has 400% crit. So give it a Warhorn, and now it's doing pretty good chunks of damage even after its first trigger. Cold Shot is an item where by itself it is terrible. It is probably one of the worst items in the game when you just have it by itself on the board and you don't have things synergizing with it, unlike some of the other bows where you could have things like Batwing, where it's by itself is pretty good. Amethyst Bow by itself is still pretty good. Molten Bow by itself is obviously very good, like you get this thing started up and it goes crazy. Cold Shot is not like those, unfortunately. It is a terrible item by itself, but once you start including it with the other items of the pack, it becomes a monster. So in its base form, whenever an item with the Frosty tag triggers, it also will trigger alongside that item. So again, with the Snowflakes combo, this is going to trigger, it's going to apply bleed, Cold Shot's then going to shoot at the same time and deal that bleed damage. You have these things working in tandem with each other, suddenly you're going to be doing a lot of damage through that bleed. But where this item gets really, really good is as you star it up, it gets guaranteed crits at 1-star because it's at baseline, it's 50%. And then at 1-star, it's 100%, so you never really need to take this past 1-star for it to be crazy. But if you ever do get it to 2-star, it starts triggering 4 times, and then when you get it to 3-star, it starts getting bonus damage every single time this item triggers, which it will trigger quite frequently if you ever get it to 3-star. But since it's triggering twice at 1-star, you don't actually need to ever get it past 1-star for it to be incredible. It starts doing 20 damage per hit because it's guaranteed to crit, obviously, more if you have Sapphire Amulet on the board. But where it's truly, truly then becoming insane is when you start pairing it with these other items. Since this thing is going to be triggering, like, constantly in a full Frost board, like, this is going to be trigger capped almost instantly in a board that has 6 Frost items and a Frost Orb on the board, so 5 items and a Frost Orb. This thing is going to be just perma-firing, so it's going to be constantly dealing 10 crits per second. Which then when you start in factoring that with items like Glacier, whenever a Frosty item triggers gain 2% crit, this is now going to be gaining 20% crit per second because of your Cold Shot. But then you start really pairing this with the things that go absolutely crazy with you being able to crit all the time, and that's things like Frostbound and your Winter's Embrace. So every time you crit, Frostbound gains +2 damage. This is where Cold Shot truly shines, because it becomes the best tool at buffing your Frostbound. This having guaranteed crit at 1-star, perma-firing, buffing the heck out of your Frostbound means as soon as this thing triggers, or your Frost Orb triggers your Frostbound, you're going to win the round. It is insane. It is probably one of the most powerful, for going for like 10 trophy wins, these 3 items together are probably one of the most powerful, like, just instant nukes in the game. Now, I can't talk about Cold Shot without talking about Winter's Embrace, because these two just function so well together. Every time you crit, you gain multicast. This has 20% crit. So this will trigger. It won't have that much multicast. But then it will trigger your Cold Shot, which will then be critting all the time, which will then buff your Winter's Embrace. Sorry, I had to mute for a second and clear my throat. But this Cold Shot will constantly buff your multi-shot of your Winter's Embrace, which will then be permanently triggering your Cold Shot, which then both of these together are going to be permanently critting, buffing the heck out of your Frostbound again. You throw on a Sapphire Amulet, now all that crits are doing more crit damage, including the crit damage of your Frostbound. Then you stick a Frost Orb with that, you're going to be perma-firing a Winter's Embrace, perma-firing your Cold Shot, and then triggering big nuke bursts from your Frostbound, just from these 3 items here, and a Cold Shot. Like, that's one of the best builds for Frost. And you can't really talk about Cold Shot without mentioning that, because a lot of Cold Shot's value comes from this combo. Icy Spear, I spoke about this already, and I showed it in the run. This goes absolutely crazy. It's super consistent, super cheap of an item, really easy to get going in a Frost build. Get a Conjure Spear, It's even more consistent. Without Conjured Sphere, you can still make it work, and it's even still then consistent. Frost Orb is a engine item. This basically just makes everything here better, because it just triggers them. Trigger your other Frosty items. And since Lyra events exists, where you can make non-Frost items Frosty through that event on day 9, it makes it a great candidate for things like Lost Fragment. You can stick a Lost Fragment that's Frosty underneath your Frozen Orb. This will trigger the Lost Fragment, giving itself more multicast. Then this will trigger again with all that multicast, trigger the Lost Fragment for even more multicast, and eventually this thing will just be looping off of the Lost Fragment permanently, which, if this thing's activating permanently, all of these are also activating permanently. So Frost Orb is pretty crazy when you think about the Lyra event and stuff like Warhorn. You got your Lost Fragment, you've even got stuff like Time Pendant, making this Frosty and putting it above a Frost Orb does something similar. Same as with the Dreamcatcher, like what you saw in there. I used the Dreamcatcher to quickly get the cooldown reduced of the Frost Orb by having it activate the Dreamcatcher that's below the Frost Orb. And you got things like that. But one of the more powerful combos is making the Warhorn Frosty, of course, and turning all this crit scaling that you have from your ice items, from your frost items, sorry, into more damage. Pairing that alongside the next item I'm going to comment on, Glacier, you suddenly have big Glacier nukes. But when you upgrade Frost Orb, it just triggers those Frosty items at extra time, and then you do 2-star, it triggers them 3 times, and then you do 3-star, and now it's triggering them 4 times and gives them 50% bonus crit. It's not that crazy to get this to 3-star, but if you ever do, it's probably like the last thing on your board that you go to 3-star in a Frosty build, because you'd much rather 3-star any of the other items just because what they give you. But yeah, Glacier by itself, not that great. It is a sword, it's pretty quick. In the early game, similar to Ice Spear, it's going to ramp up its own crit pretty fast, so this thing becomes kind of like Thanos for the early game. You are going to take big chunks out of health bars, because 70 damage every 2.5 seconds on like day 4 is quite a lot of damage still. And I say 70 because this thing is going to get 100% crit super fast, especially if you have other frost items on the board. You get it to 1-star, it's now going to be dealing 140 damage, because, again, 4% crit. The difference between 1-star and 2-star when it comes to its passive is kind of a joke, because by the time you get this thing to 1-star, it's probably already crit capped, just because of how quick this thing gains crit. And then you get it to 2-star, it's now also gaining damage every single time a Frosty item crits. So this thing at 2-star is pretty crazy, because, again, if you think about what I said about the Frostbound over here, and how this synergizes really well with Cold Shot, well, Glacier also synergizes really well with Cold Shot, and it's quicker. The only difference is, this is an epic item, so you're going to see more of them earlier than you would a Frostbound. When we get it at a 3-star, it's the same thing, it's just gaining more of those values, but again, you're not really going to 3-star Glacier before 3-starring other items. Talking about Frostbound, we spoke on this when it came to Cold Shot, but this is probably the best Frost item once it's going, because it's quite easy to get this number into the thousands, and you're going to get this into the thousands. You're going to start critting all the time, because simply put, +2 damage every time a Cold Shot crits, that is 20 damage a second on a perma-firing Cold Shot this is gaining. And then you get this to 1-star, it's gaining 40 damage per second from your Cold Shot, plus also guaranteed to crit, so that's 80 damage per hit per second gained from a Cold Shot. And then you gain 2-star, again, it's 8, so 80 turned to 160, which is then obviously like just going absolutely crazy when you factor in Sapphire Amulet and your Frost Orb and nuking enemies down. And then at 3-star, it's giving all of your items that damage. So this is one of those targets where I'm on about, if you're going to 3-star something from the Ice Pack, it's probably going to be something like Frostbound. Because giving all your items, not all your Frosty items, all your items on your board, 8 damage every time any item crits is pretty crazy. It's just, this is a legendary, so you need to get it to 2-star, and then you need to Crown Forge it, because it's unlikely that you're going to have this 2-star before day 9. I mean, maybe you might be able to merge it if you have Pandora's Box and Mimic Rod stuff going on, but usually you're only going to be able to 3-star this if you get it with a Crown Forge. But this is probably, next to Sapphire Amulet, the best item to 3-star in a Frosty board. Sapphire Amulet is pretty simple. It's just a crit multiplier increase. It says critical strike damage, but this does mean all critical effects. So when you're using perks and stuff like Turtle and Chosen, where it says your healing can crit for 2x and your shielding can crit for 2x, Sapphire Amulet does actually affect that and will turn it from being that 2x to 3x. And if you level it up, it goes to 4x, and then if you level it to level 2, it goes to 5x, and then at 3-star, it becomes 6x. It's very simple, doesn't get, like, any crazy new effect. It's just simply increasing your crit multiplier, and is one of the best items to put in any build that could crit in any way. Like, if you're trying to increase your DPS from physical damage, Sapphire Amulet should be on your board with a max crit capped item. And then you include stuff like, say, oh, I went past it. The Frost Orb over here, once this is 3-starred, like giving bonus crit, well, suddenly having bonus crit on an item that's being able to crit cap and getting lots of crit multiplier, plus a Frosty Warhorn giving bonus damage, like this thing goes crazy. Winter's Embrace, much like Frostbound, but instead of getting damage, it's gain multicast. Again, this is a engine piece to cause your cold shot to go crazy when you have these 3 items on the board together. So this will trigger, it's rather slow, 6 seconds, but it will trigger your cold shot with each flurry. That will crit, give itself back some more multicast, so this next trigger is going to have even more multicast, causing this flurry even more, and then this is going to have even more multicast, and then it's going to keep looping back and forth like that. Eventually, this will permacast, giving this a bunch of damage. As you star it up, it starts gaining more and more multicast on each crit, and then you get it to 2-star, it gains permanent multicast under every crit, and then at 3-star, you gain multicast and damage. So it becomes a slower version of a base Frost Tome, but it's also got multicasting. But again, this basically exists to trigger from Frozen Orb, to then trigger your Cold Shot a bunch, which will then permabuff your Frostbound. In terms of lines and the way that I would play Frosty, you saw it in that run. If I see an early Ice Spear, I'm going to be grabbing this and immediately look for an Conjure Spear, print myself a bunch of Ice Spears, get a Frozen Orb, get a Sapphire Amulet, get away to Nature's Call or Lost Fragment, the orb, so it multicasts, and just have these spears nuke people's health bars. Or if I see an early Snowflakes and Cold Shot, I can easily pick these up and combo these together and slowly transition this into something. And in the mid to late game, I'm basically hoping to look for the Frozen Orb combo with the Frostbound and the Winter's Embrace if I'm running the Cold Shot. If you're running something like, say, Scorch or Chosen or Turtle or any of these things that leave like buffs on the floor, like puts buffs on your towers, like apply statuses to enemies, putting your Cold Shot inside that obviously is a lot of value when it's perma triggering. Anyway, I think that about wraps it up for the Frosty Overexplained. It's really that simple. Frost is very strong. It's usually considered pretty bad by a lot of people, but to me it's very versatile because there is many build paths. It's super powerful, super potent, crit is super strong, and it's a pack that I can never ever justify turning off because of the Lyra event for Frozen Orb, and just how strong Sapphire Amulet is. So even when you're not running a Frost build, these 2 items are just incredibly powerful. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.